Gasoline prices are spiking, folks, and it is for good reason. Our refining capacity in the United States is falling behind gasoline consumption. We've been warning about this. We've been saying that this is a problem. We now have approximately 20 days on hand of gasoline stockpiles. If we consume at the same rate, if we increase demand and all production stops, we have 20 days of gasoline in the system. That is a lot worse than a lot of people are realizing, and it continues to get worse. We're about 10 million barrels of gasoline less this day this year, versus this day last year. We have production issues happening because refineries keep getting closed, and they're not opening any new ones here in the United States. Unless we import gasoline from outside the U.S., which is something that we haven't done for a very long time, we're going to have some issues. So let's jump into what's going on right now. So welcome to the Poplar Report. I'm Steve Poplar. I'm an accountant by trade, and so I nerd out on these things like supply chain issues and what's going on with gasoline supplies. I actually look at how much we have in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and I actually look at what's going on with the stockpiles of gasoline, and it is very concerning. Now, are we going to run out of gasoline tomorrow? No. And this is not in any way to tell you panic because gasoline's gone, but what I'm telling you is that sooner or later this is going to be a very serious problem, and just as it's going to take us a long time to get into this problem, it's taken us decades to get into this problem, it's going to take us decades or more to get out of the problem. So if you are concerned about what's going on with gasoline, if you need gasoline for your day-to-day use, and you don't like paying extremely high prices for gasoline, this is important. Because what's going to happen is the price of gasoline is going to go up until people stop buying it. And you may need it. So what's the problem? The problem is that we can't build new refineries in the United States due to EPA rules. EPA rules and, save the little turtles habitats, and, they're always going to find some kind of creature on the property that they want to expand the refineries onto. I've talked a lot at length on this channel about the problem that we have refineries that don't refine the oil that we produce here in the United States. We're the ones who first commercially really pumped oil out of the ground and made it into things like kerosene and everything like that. Just north of here in Pittsburgh is Oil City, where the first oil wells really went into the ground. And Cleveland, Ohio is where most of those refineries were in the early days. Before they realized what we could actually use oil and gasoline for, they were dumping gasoline into the rivers because didn't have any use for it. But now we have a use for gasoline, and it's not a byproduct anymore. And in many respects, it's actually the main product of why we're refining oil in the first place. We have, right now, we're producing 9.5 million barrels of gasoline per day. But we are consuming 9.3 million barrels of gasoline per day. Now, at first that sounds good. Okay, we're producing more gasoline than we are consuming. Except for this fact. That's when all the refineries are operating. And all the refineries aren't operating because they have to be maintenance. There has to be shutdowns for this issue or that issue, an explosion at that one has to be repaired, and fire at that one. A storm comes in and knocks out a whole bunch of refineries, and suddenly it takes weeks to get those refineries back operational again. So we need to actually build up the stockpiles going into hurricane season, and that's not where we are. We have 10 million barrels of gasoline less than we did last year going into hurricane season. And last year we got off relatively light on hurricanes, but there's no promise that that's going to happen again this year. The problem is that we don't have enough refining capability to produce gasoline here in the United States. So we're going to have to start ordering tankers of gasoline coming from the Middle East, where they're refining it over there and bringing it over here. We've talked about, like I said, how we need Saudi Arabian oil. We need oil from the Middle East to run our refineries here in the U.S. The oil that we're getting out of the ground with fracking, we can't actually use our refineries for that stuff. We can mix a little bit of it in, but most of it has to get on tankers and get shipped elsewhere for refining. So while we are a net importer of energy, which is different than the previous administration where we became a net exporter of energy. But, you know, just a few years of wonderful green policies and we've become more dependent upon everyone out there. But the problem is we can't retool our refineries. We can't change our refineries from, you know, basically heavy oils. I'm going to get in trouble by saying words and stuff like that because I want to be technically correct. And so the oil that comes out of fracking inside the United States is a different type of oil than the type of oil that comes from like Saudi Arabia and Alaska. And our refineries can process Alaskan oil, Middle Eastern oil, but it can't really handle the oil made from the fracking platforms. So we have to export that oil, and then we have to import oil from the Middle East, which makes no sense whatsoever, but they can't change the refineries. Why? Because of green policies. That's right, because if they try to change one of the refineries over, it's going to run into all these environmental regulations and they're going to get shut down. And they know that, so that's why they don't change over the refineries. It's extremely inefficient. We're tankering gas, oil all the way across the ocean and tankering other gas, oil back across the ocean. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's terrible for the planet if you're into all that kind of thing. And so, you know, just more policies that make no sense whatsoever. Their avowed goal of reducing emissions, it actually creates more emissions. But hey, you know, so currently our refineries are running at about 94% capacity, 94.3% capacity, and that's pretty good. Because you always have some refineries shut down for maintenance and repairs and stuff like that. But what we see is going into the hurricane season, the refinery capacity drops dramatically and we start eating into our gasoline supplies. And that's what's probably going to happen again this year. Cold weather last year shut down our refineries. We also had issues with fires. And our refinery capacity is always going to be 94%-ish or less. We can sometimes get it up to 96% in kind of an emergency, but that delays repairs and maintenance that really needs to happen. But we see that refinery rate can drop dramatically down to 70%, 75% during a hurricane. It hits like the Texas area, Texas, Louisiana areas. And that's kind of what we're looking at right now. So we are already down to 20 days of gasoline in the United States if the refineries were to shut down, and it's slowly dropping. It's slowly dropping. And are we going to run out next week, next month? Probably not, unless something catastrophic happens. But we have less and less buffer in the system. We have less and less stockpiles, less and less supplies. We see that with grain. We see that with wheat. We see that with rice. We see that with oil. We see that with gasoline here in the United States, friends. Prices are going to be going up because there just isn't enough available for everybody to have stuff. In a perfect world with no incidents, no problems in the next year, we would probably be okay. If things stay the same and we don't have any problems, we should be good for another year. But if we have any problems, things could change very rapidly. What happens if the people that we are selling weapons to attack over in Europe decide to start sabotaging our plants here in the United States? What happens if the oil that's coming from Saudi Arabia gets stopped by Iran on the high seas? Our refineries could run out of fuel to put into the refineries very quickly. Well, that's why we have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, except for the fact that it's half drained. Our Strategic Petroleum Reserve is at roughly 50% of what it should be. And it is at a 40-year low. The administration in Washington decided that it would be a great idea to sell 180 million barrels of oil out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to help win re-election. And they have done so. And now it's half empty. Or, if you're an optimist, half full. But still, the fact is that that means that we have very little oil on hand to refine if the supplies from the Middle East get disrupted. Are we going to see higher gas prices, higher oil prices out there in the next number of months? Probably, especially in the United States, where we're already seeing prices jump. Last week, they jumped 4 cents in one day. It's the highest jump in a year. And we're seeing prices steadily climbing upwards because they're realizing that the stockpiles of gasoline are low. They're trying to destroy some demand because people are using too much gas and we're not making enough. All right, folks, that's where we are. That's the information I got for you. If you want to check out another video from this channel, there's one right up here. Thanks so much for watching. Steve Poplar of the Poplar Report, out.